Hello YouTube, how you doing? Today's lesson, I'm just really going over how to effectively plan writing task 1. The reason that I decided to create this lesson is I've had lots of students over the years become confused with what parts of data they actually need to be writing about. So which parts are relevant, which parts aren't relevant. So I just really wanted to make a nice simple process for you guys to simplify that. So let's talk about the overall structure. So ideally you want to have 8 sentences because ultimately most sentences or most points are going to be around about 20 words. And if you have 8 sentences times 20 words, you have 160 words, which is a little bit more than what you need for writing task 1. So I'm sure, as you know, if you're watching this video, that the first 2 sentences are to do with your introduction. So the first sentence is paraphrasing the title, and then the second sentence is going to be the overview. We're not going to worry too much about that today. I'm going to get into the details of sentences 3, 4, 5. So when I say 3, 4, 5, this is going to be main body A or main body 1. And then exactly the same for the second part. Let's space this out a little bit. Pop this over here. Okay. So when we are differentiating between main body A and main body B, we need to decide what are we going to write for each of these. So the way I like to do this is in main body A, we want to look at pieces of data that are doing the same things. And we want to group those pieces of data together. And then main body B is going to be our data that's doing things differently. So pieces of data that are reacting in a different way. So if we take this line graph over here, we've got 4 pieces of data: rates, revenue, user charges, borrowings, and grants and subsidies. Or we could just say blue, red, green, and purple. So what we want to do is decide in this main body A, in these 3 sentences, this is the data that we want that's going to be doing the same thing. So it's pretty clear looking at this task here that the blue and the red line are pretty identical, minus the start, and maybe the gap widens a little bit as time goes on. So we can very easily put rates, revenue, and user charges as main body A. So just to recap, this is data that's doing the same, and this is going to be our first main body. So more specifically, sentences 3, 4, and 5. Remember sentences 1 and 2 here. This is for our introduction. So our first main body, the data that's doing the same. And then we want to do exactly the same thing, but for data that's doing something different, and that's going to be borrowings and grants and subsidies, because it's kind of all over the place, right? So borrowings is up and down, whereas grants and subsidies slowly rises, reaches a peak, and then steadily declines towards the end. So they're doing their own thing. Okay, now here comes the tricky part. So we've got our main bodies, but how do we write an essay in a logical and a clear order? I think one of the most common mistakes that I see students doing is they try to pick pieces of data that seem like they make sense. So for example, they might say, oh, this here's the highest point, so let me write about this, and let me compare the highest point to the lowest point here. So they might make this as their first sentence. This might be sentence number 3. Remember, sentence 1 is paraphrasing and overview. But logically, making this comparison from 2012 to 2022, it just doesn't make much sense, right? And I think when you plan this way, like the highest point, the lowest point, and these interesting points, a lot of the data is going to get left to the side. And also, it takes a long time to really choose your data. So if you have a time frame, when I say a time frame, you can see on the axes down the bottom here, we've got 10 years, right? We really just want to split this into 3 sections. So that way we're going to cover all of the information, and it doesn't take us very long to do it. So these 10 years, how would we like to split them? Let's have a look. So we can go 3-3-4, 4-3-3. Honestly, it doesn't really matter. It's more so based on the quality of your writing. So let's do it like this. We'll split it from 2012 to 2015. And then we'll do 2015 to 2018. And then we'll leave the last 4 years as our third section. So just to recap, we've split the paragraphs into similarities, main body A is similarities, and then main body B is differences. And now what we've done is we've taken those main bodies and we've split them into 3 sections, 3 equal sections. So when we write main body A here, our first sentence in the main body A, sentence 3, is going to be comparing 2012 to 2015. So you're going to compare rates revenue to user charges. And then your fourth sentence is going to be the same, rates revenue compared to user charges between 2015 and 2018. And then finally, you do the same thing again here, where you compare rates revenue to user charges between 2018 and 2022. And then we want to follow the exact same process. So this is sentence 5, sentence 6, sentence 7. And then you've got your whole essay planned. You know exactly what you're going to write at each stage. Once you've done this process a few times, it should only take you a couple of minutes, if that. You'd probably get it done in about a minute, leaving you 19 minutes to really focus on actually writing, rather than worrying about which pieces of data you need to write about. Now, the elements of these sentences, so what's in them, obviously varies between the quality of your writing and the band that you want, but that's something we can cover in another lesson. I've got a few more of these just to really illustrate this for you. So you can also do the same process with a map. So ideally, we always want to look at similarities and differences. With maps, it's a bit more difficult because there's lots of differences and not very many similarities. So when we think about main body A and main body B, we really want to try and group the 2 main bodies into 2 different types of changes. So if we look at this map in particular, we can see that there's a lot of road work being built, not really much being removed, and a lot of buildings being built as well. So we just want to categorize our 2 main bodies into those. We're going to have one main body about buildings, and then we're going to have one main body about roads. And then we just do the same process. 3, 4, 5 for main body A, so sentence 3, sentence 4, sentence 5, and then 6, 7, 8 for B. So let's start with the roads, right? Very clearly, you can see that this little road going to the school has been converted into a dual carriageway which encircles the whole town centre. So this is probably the focal point of the roads. So we'll have this as sentence number 3. And then if we look at some other road changes, I think in contrast you can see that rather than this main road, rather than it being changed anyway, it's kind of stayed the same, but they've made it only for pedestrians. Maybe it's slightly wider. And then when we look here, can we see any other road changes? I guess there's this road here for the new housing. Okay, great. So that's what our first main body is going to look like. The first sentence, we're going to talk about how this little road has been converted into a dual carriageway, which encircles the whole town. Our second sentence for the main body, or our fourth sentence in our whole essay, is how this main road going through the city has stayed pretty much the same, but now it's only for pedestrians. And then our last sentence would just be this little extra road that's been added onto the dual carriageway into the new housing. And now we want to follow the same process for the buildings. So how have the buildings changed? And then we want to write about the 3 most significant changes throughout the map. So let's change color, just so we are on the same page, that this is now for main body 2 rather than the first main body. So very obviously the shops north of the main road have been converted into this shopping center, which has a bus station and a car park. So this is definitely going to be our 6th sentence. Interestingly enough, the shops below the main road, now the pedestrian only road, have stayed the same. So this is worth writing about. And then for the last one, when it comes to buildings, you have a few choices. You could talk about the park becoming smaller to make room for new housing. I think that makes the most sense. So we'll talk about this here. Alternatively, you could just talk about the new housing here, but I don't think it is as relevant. And you know, if you are making longer sentences, then you can obviously talk about both of them in one. Okay, so we've seen how to do it for a line graph, how to do it for a map. What about mixed charts? A huge mistake a lot of students do is they try to compare the data between the pie chart and the table, for instance. Now, if the data is comparable, then this is fine, although it's still a little complicated. It's much better just to separate these, right? And I think mixed charts are actually the easiest to do, because you can always just do your first main body as one chart and your second main body as the second chart. So you might be thinking, what about my comparisons? Well, you're comparing within each chart, right? So we'll do this as main body A, and this is main body B. And then we just want to follow the same process. We want to try and split the data into 3 sections, if possible in a very logical order. So we have percentages here for main body A. So we just really want to go from either the lowest to the largest or the largest to the lowest. I'm going to go from, the largest. So what is this about? Australians living in Australia, more or less, right? So your first sentence might be something like, unsurprisingly, Australians dominate the nationalities within Australia at 73%. We'll write the Australians alone because they take up the majority of the data. So we have 5 categories left. We started with the largest for sentence 3. So sentence 4 needs to be the second largest. However, we're probably going to group it together with something else, right? So we'll group together 14% with 7%. 14% being other and 7% being British, I think, on the shades of blue. Yeah. And then the last 3 little percentages we can just put together as one sentence. So just gone from highest to lowest, group them together in a logical way. Okay, now we want to do the same thing here. We want to put together the sentences that are fairly, or the data, the pieces of data that are fairly similar to each other. So, what stands out? Well, the vast majority of Chinese have decided to live within cities inside of Australia. Only 1% of them don't. So similar to here, how we've said most of the population is Australian, we're going to say most Chinese nationals living in Australia prefer to live in the cities. Or not most, we'd say the vast majority, something which really shows that it's 99%. So this would be sentence number 6 and the start of your second main body. So we've started with the largest, right? Now we want to work in a logical order. The reason why we want to do this logically is because you're marked on the structure of your essay, and that's also the choice of your sentences. If you're going, from highest to lowest and then in the middle, it doesn't make too much sense. So you want to follow a logical order. So the next largest is New Zealand. And we can put the New Zealanders with the British because they're very similar, right? So this would be sentence number 7. And then the Aussies and the Dutch are fairly close together as well. So this is sentence number 8. One question I do often get asked by my students is, should you miss out data? And the only time to really miss out data is when there's so much that you can't write about all of it. But the majority of the time, it's fairly easy just to separate it into 3 categories, and 3 sentences for each main body, and just write about it all. All right, let's do one more just to illustrate this. This might be one of those pieces of data that you get where you're like, there's just too much going on for me to categorize it in a logical way. I don't know where to start. So again, just follow our 2-minute process. Step 1, separate the data into 2 categories, A and B. If possible, similarities and differences. In this case, male employees and female employees are fairly similar in number size. So we'll put them together as A. And for main body 2, we'll put the total employees together with the factories. With time, it's very easy, if I'm honest with you. You just want to split the time into 3. So we've got 10 years, 10 years, 10 years. So sentence number 3 would be here. 3, 4, 5, and then the same here. 6, 7, 8. Planning done. 2 minutes. And I'm not really getting into the details on what elements you need to write in the sentences. This video is purely about data selection and planning on how to write your essay. To give you an example of a sentence, you would have a look. So for data point number 3 here, you would identify that both of these data points are going down in this time period. And then you would compare that to each other. So it might be something like initially between 1851 and 1861, both male employees and female employees decreased. However, males did so significantly more, in brackets, by data amount, compared to female employees, which only decreased 30,000. And this is the general way that you would write your sentences. Again, depends on your ability level and also the band score that you are looking for. I think that pretty much brings it to the end. Hopefully now this has given you some clarity on how you can just plan your task 1s in a very quick manner. So just to recap again, I know I've done it a lot, but split your main bodies into main body A and B. Try to group these with similarities and differences. And then once you've done that, just split the data into 3 parts. If you can, do it from the beginning to the end. If you don't have a time frame, so when I say no time frame, for example here, when we talk about the nationalities in Australia and where those individuals chose to live, we don't have any time, right? So instead of going from the beginning of the time to the end of the time, we just want to start with the most significant data, which is usually the largest, not always, to the lowest, and then split it into 3. Now, you might say, this is not the ideal way to do it. Maybe there is a better way to notice the relationship between the data and be able to write it. And you're absolutely right. This is the most realistic way to do it. Because at the end of the day, you don't have the time to sit there for 10 minutes, really analyze the data in detail, and find all of the interconnectedness between them, so the relationships between them. So it's much more realistic for your exam to have a system in place that you know is very effective and it can be done quickly. And this is exactly what that is. I'm always happy to help anyone, so if you have any questions, you can always just send me a message on YouTube or even in the comments.